Well, good morning. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. I want to welcome you to Energy Innovation 2010, which really should be a great day to explore these issues in more depth. I want to make just a couple of opening remarks, but before I do that, I want to thank our sponsors, our co-sponsors, Ted Nordhaus and Michael Schellenberger of Breakthrough Institute, which are key partners. We're hearing more from both of them. Also, American Enterprise Institute, the Brookings Institution, the Clean Air Task Force, the Consortium for Science, Policy and Outcomes at Arizona State University, Securing America's Energy Future, and Third Way. And then also our media partners at Yale Environment 360 and the Energy Collective. And last and most important, I want to thank the Nathan Cummings Foundation and Peter Teague, who is here, without whose support we really couldn't have done this and put this conference on. So let me just make a couple of opening remarks and we'll jump right into the first panel. But our view is that the U.S. economy is at this critical inflection point right now. And we can essentially go in the direction of continued decline and continued loss of global competitiveness, or we can begin to turn that around. Right now, we're losing the race for global innovation advantage. We released a report last year called the Atlantic Century, and we benchmarked the U.S. against 39 other nations on innovation-based competitiveness. And while we came out 6th overall, what was most troubling and disturbing about our findings in that report was that we came out 40th of 40 countries in the rate of progress over the last decade. Every other country we looked at, Asia, Europe, Latin America, has made more progress on becoming more innovative and more competitive than has the United States. And we see that also in clean energy, where we've lost market share in core clean energy technologies, solar, wind, and others. And in a lot of ways, this is really one of these things where we could change this around. The U.S. has led every technology revolution, every technology innovation since World War II, and there's no reason we couldn't do the same. And there's no reason we couldn't do the same with clean energy innovation as well. If we do that, if we win in clean energy innovation in the U.S., it means not only will we reduce the trade deficit in oil and imported energy. Right now, as soon as the recession or the full recovery comes, we'll probably be back to about an $800 billion a year trade deficit. Reducing our oil imports would be a key component of reducing the trade deficit. Not only would we then also be producing millions of new jobs in clean energy and exports related to that, but most importantly, we would be providing the world with low-cost, high-quality energy and energy systems that the rest of the world would rush to embrace. They wouldn't be embracing it because they're signing on to a protocol or because they're being forced to embrace clean energy. They'd be embracing clean energy because it's cheap, it's effective, and it's better than the current energy system of today. Now, the only way we're going to get to that, both for the world and the U.S., is innovation. And that's really what the theme of today's conference is all about. Why is it important? How do we get there? What the business community is doing? What are the kinds of policies we need? And we'll wrap up at the end of the day with what are the politics of this? We've got a couple of folks from the Hill, the Republican and a Democrat, talking about where is this going to go as we go forward into this next Congress. So I think we'll have a great day today. I want to start by asking the panel to come up for our first panel. And while they're doing that, I want to introduce Richard Harris, the moderator. The panel is the Innovation Imperative, Economy, Security, and Environment. And Richard is the, you should all know Richard and hear him when you're driving to work in the morning. He reports on science issues for NPR's news magazine, Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. He's covered the UN climate negotiations with the Earth Summit in Rio in '92 and Kyoto '97 and Copenhagen, and I guess you weren't in Cancun, but that's everything else. And a distinguished journalist and winner of many, many awards and does great coverage on this. So, Richard, we thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Please be here. I guess this mic is on. Yeah, I was actually in the Gulf of Mexico, actually at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, looking at the oil spill from the mini submarine, which is why I didn't go to Cancun, but I think I made a good choice. So anyway, welcome everybody. The first panel here, I think we'll just sort of kick things off, I'm going to give very brief introductions. There are detailed introductions if you want to know more. Speakers' bios are in your folder, so I will just give you a very quick orientation to the folks that are here, and so we'll ask the big question why in the next hour, and explore that from various perspectives. And the speakers will be Robbie Diamond, to my right, who is the president and CEO of the Electrification Coalition. He's very big on electric vehicles, and we will hear about why. He was also the founder, president, and CEO of Securing America's Future, which is another organization that you may be familiar with. To his right is Roger Pielke, Jr., who's a professor of environmental studies at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And he's sort of, I think of him as a social scientist who sort of thinks about the intersection between science and technology, how you bring policy and sort of marry policy and technology. He's recently written a book called The Climate Fix, What Scientists and Politicians Won't Tell You About Global Warming, which is a good read. And in fact, he was featured briefly on All Things Considered, talking about his book a couple weeks back. To his right is Devon Swezey from the Breakthrough Institute, where he works as an energy and climate policy analyst. And he wrote one of the first journal articles talking about the new Apollo project on energy, sort of the, let's think big about energy back in 2005 that came out. And Bob Atkinson has already introduced himself, president and founder of Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. So anyhow, let's get to the meat of the conversation here. Each person will have 5 to 7 minutes to introduce things, and then we will proceed with a little conversation, question and answers from the audience. So Robbie, please.
Thank you very much. Let me start by of course, innovation, as you heard from Rob, is clearly the path to tomorrow's jobs and the nation's security. Since World War II, we've led in every one of those innovative periods, and as Rob said, will we again today? And certainly, as the world becomes more competitive, I think everyone's sitting back and questioning that, and the stakes couldn't be higher. For the United States, the Securing America's Future Energy and the Electrification Coalition really focuses on the economic and national security risks of our oil dependence. When one looks at both the challenges of where we are today, but really the future growth of oil demand, I mean, it's just utterly breathtaking. Right now we use 87 million barrels a day. In the world, 20 million of those barrels are used in the United States, or 19 million barrels. We use more oil in the United States than any country, just for our transportation sector, than any country uses in total a year. In 2008, we spent it cost the economy about $500 billion, according to the Department of Energy, that oil dependence that year of the price spike. And that was due to the transfer of wealth, the economic dislocation as businesses are changing their plans due to the volatility of oil prices, and then finally due to foregone GDP, as people have to spend more for oil to get to work, as opposed to buying something that they might otherwise buy. The Department of Energy estimates that it has cost the country about $5 trillion since the first oil shock in the 1970s. And that is, if one looks at the trade deficits we just heard about, and really all this discussion about the economic future and the deficits, and certainly the trade deficit and the balance of trade is something very important in that. Right now, in 2008, it cost us a little over $380 billion for our oil, which was 56% of our trade deficit. So every year in January, when the clock turns into the new year, we know we're going to be spending over $200 billion. Just writing a check to someone else, and that productive money is going to go overseas. Now, certainly, there's the economic costs, and every major recession in modern times has been led by an oil price spike, including the current one. So at the same time as we were getting the changes in people's arms and the mortgage mess, oil prices were skyrocketing. And as we like to say, and that really oil prices were the match that lit the fuse. If you look at our national security concerns, I mean, really our military and our foreign policy are completely constrained by our oil dependence. If one looks at, just look at the WikiLeaks cables. I mean, in the WikiLeaks cables, there's an explicit cable saying that China will not support us on Iran unless we get Saudi Arabia to guarantee that they'll make up the oil if Iran ever pulls it off the market. I mean, it doesn't get more explicit than that. Then what is on people's minds as we deal with foreign policy crises around the world? If you look, that's sort of the meta message, right? You've got Venezuela, you've got Russia, you've got Iran. When you look at oil producers, 90% of oil reserves and natural gas reserves are owned by national oil companies. ExxonMobil is the 15th largest holder of reserves. They actually hold such a minuscule amount. So what we know as big oil is actually not big oil. And that's a big problem because these are countries that are making political decisions on oil supply and not sort of free market decisions. And finally, I'd say that just in the field, right? So if you listen to the former Commandant of the Marine Corps, the most recent one, Commandant Conway, he in an energy forum said that the greatest threat one of the greatest threats in Afghanistan is really the supply routes of getting fuels to the troops. In fact, the amount of oil that each troop needs about 22 gallons of oil right now, and since Vietnam that has grown, I think it's 175% per troop. And when you look at the convoys and the people who die in these battles, is really the sort of the soft side of our military, the need to get this oil into the field. But the problem just gets worse. That's really what's so staggering. So in the United States, we have 1,148 cars. This was 2 years ago, before China's ramp up taking over the auto market. But in China, in the United States, we have 1,148 cars per 1,000 eligible drivers. We have more cars than people can drive them. In China, they only had 9. And in India, they had 11. And in France, you're talking about, in the UK, about 700 per 1,000 eligible drivers. So as everyone pursues the God-given right to transportation and a vehicle, a personal vehicle, that is why the International Energy Agency predicts that 100% of the oil growth, going from 87 million barrels a day to way over 100 million barrels a day, is going to be in India and China. And so it's just this huge problem that is at the bane of our our national security, economic security, national security, and environmental security. Just, wanted to talk for a minute about the solutions because this is about innovation. Energy is ripe for innovation. First of all, it's such a large sector of our economy. It's as I say, it's so important to everything we do in the way of life and the future of the civilization as we know it. And then finally, it's really the only solutions are innovative solutions, I think. And really, there's no other way out of it unless to innovate ourselves out of this. And finally, I think now, especially the younger generation, people appear to be willing to pay more for some of these things. And I think, though, that is one of the major challenges of energy, which is people are totally sensitive to the $1,000 per vehicle, the dollar per gallon, or the penny per kilowatt hour. And a lot of people say we need a Manhattan Project, we need an Apollo program, whatever it may be. And in fact, no one's ever, besides North Korea and Iran, no one's selling nuclear weapons, on the market, right? There's not some market. It doesn't matter that price. Or space travel is just becoming something that they feel that they can market. And so it's very different, I think, than those types of challenges. And I think scale is the other big thing. So I've, the early part of this of my discussion talked about the numbers. I think the numbers are huge. The capital costs are huge. This is not like, and that's why, all these venture capitalists who kind of wade into this suddenly are struck by how many hundreds of millions of dollars they need for that first plant just to prove that they can produce more on a bigger, for the whole country. And I think that is a huge challenge that hopefully people will talk about today. From the perspective of oil, we clearly believe that the only way to fundamentally end your dependence is electrifying transportation. It's because those fuel sources are diverse. You're no longer dependent on one fuel source. You have all these fuel sources that we produce electricity with. Of course, none of them really being oil. They're domestic, stable in price. There's an infrastructure that exists, and so we think that is an appropriate solution. Look, the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt are, they were delivered this week, the first cars. Clearly a little expensive. There's definitely challenges in front of us, but something well worth the investment of the country. China is investing $15 billion to figure this out. And in this country, our investment at the moment pales by that, and as I said before, we're spending hundreds of billions a year on oil. So if you can figure this out, you've really solved a lot of your problems. We've proposed that the way to innovate this is really focus on the deployment strategy of the vehicles. That, right, the vehicles are coming on the market, but can they come out at a scale and a scope that matters to economic and national security? There's only 1.6 million hybrids on the road today. It's taken that out of 250 million vehicles in the United States, and it's taken us 11 years to get there. So hybrids are great and may be a stepping stone to electrification, but clearly not solving any of our problems today, right? It's a niche market, basically in some cities on the coast. And how do you make sure that something like an electric vehicle that's here can really penetrate the market? And I'll stop there. I could talk about how we think that's possible, but I think I've laid out the problem as we see it and why energy matters so much.
Thanks. An excellent introduction. Roger?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. I was asked to talk about innovation and climate policy, and I'm going to jump right into it. Climate policy has come to mean many things to many people, but at its core is a focus on limiting the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. For that to actually occur, the technical term is stabilization, emissions from the burning of fossil fuels has to go essentially to zero. It's not about a little reduction, it's about a massive reduction. And the conventional approach to trying to move in that direction follows a very complex chain of causality. It goes something like this. We have a debate, an argument about science. The scientific debate is resolved once and for all. That's used by scientists and activists through the media to shape public opinion. Public opinion becomes so strong that it supports international agreements on targets and timetables for action. Those targets and timetables are brought back to different countries, and they're used as a justification for binding national governments to commit to specific domestic policies, which might be different in different countries. Those domestic policies then create incentives for innovation, and they're implemented leading to innovation that revolutionizes our energy system, thereby reducing emissions and stabilizing concentrations. There's no point in sugarcoating it. That approach has failed comprehensively. Over the last 20 years, emissions have gone up. They're even accelerating. The carbon intensity of the U.S. economy, based on early data, is higher in 2010 than it was in 2009. Same can be said in Europe and in the developing countries. This is not a statement about the worthiness of the cause or the integrity of the people pursuing it. It's just a simple reality that policymaking is tough, and sometimes the best laid plans don't work. But if you think about that chain of causality, there's something that everyone agrees on. And that something that everyone agrees on is that we have to stimulate innovation. And the real debate about climate policy is not whether innovation is necessary, but the means with which we would use to stimulate it. And my critique of climate policy says that we should learn the lessons of experience, and rather than this very complex Rube Goldberg type approach to stimulating innovation, let's just cut to the chase and go right to innovation. Let me give you an example using some numbers of the magnitude of the challenge and how comprehensively we've failed. I cite a lot of case studies, and there's no point in picking on any particular country because all countries, I think, are failing equally well in the emissions reductions challenge. But consider the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has the most ambitious domestic climate change legislation. They have committed to a 34% reduction in their emissions from 1990 baseline by 2020. Under very modest economic growth, which I think they'd be very happy with in the UK, over the next 10 years, this means that the United Kingdom would have to be as carbon efficient as France by no later than 3 or 4 years from right now. What does it mean to be as carbon efficient as France for the UK in the next 3 or 4 years? It means the equivalent of 40 nuclear power plants worth of carbon-free energy to be deployed in the next 3 or 4 years. It's not going to happen. Nuclear power plants certainly do exist. They're real technologies. And maybe in some scenario you might envision 40 nuclear power plants worth of carbon-free energy being deployed in 4 years. But the practical reality is it's not going to happen. The UK is going to miss its targets. What has their response been? The UK Climate Change Committee in recent weeks announced a report saying that their focus now is on 2030, and they're going to up the target. 2020 now is when they want to see emissions peak. So this kicking the can down the road has been characteristic of this issue, and I guess my focus has been on trying to take these first steps rather than worry about how we're going to complete the job. Now, not only is a focus on innovation good policy, but it's good politics. I can just give you an anecdote. A month ago, I was in the UK. I participated in a debate with folks from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. It's Nigel Lawson's so-called skeptic group, who's very much opposed to action on climate change. And at the debate, I oriented my focus on the need for energy innovation. And I argued there was at least 7 good reasons why a focus on energy innovation makes sense. And if you don't like the climate justification, fine. You know, there's others. I'll just list them. There's a lot to say about all of them. But containing energy cost, securing supply, expanding global energy access, ending damaging energy subsidies, reducing carbon dioxide is one of them, addressing other environmental and societal consequences of reliance on fossil fuels, and also, importantly, national competitiveness. When I laid out this argument, I had a visceral, angry reaction from my opponent at the debate. He said, I thought this debate was about climate. I would like to argue about climate science. And I simply just refused that debate. The reason he was angry is that a lot of these other justifications for action make perfectly good sense. And if we refuse to debate issues of climate science, we find that there's a much broader justification for action. Let me just conclude by saying that the way forward is already in place in some locations around the world. I'm going to cite Germany and India as 2 very diverse and different countries, but which are pursuing very similar routes to energy and innovation. In Germany, they have implemented a new law. It is controversial in Germany, but they put a tax on nuclear fuel rods with the ambition of raising something like $40 billion US worth of funds, with some large portion of that to be invested in energy innovation. Why? Because Germany has a goal of getting off of nuclear power and fossil fuels by 2050. And the way they see that they're going to do that is they're building a bridge. Nuclear power is their energy bridge to the future. India has done something very similar. India has put a 50 rupee per ton tax levy on coal, including mined coal and imports, with the idea that this money is going to be invested in clean energy innovation. Now, it works out to be about a 30-cent per ton carbon tax, which, if you're in the environmental community, you'd laugh at. But the reality is that it hasn't been controversial, and it raises what in India is a significant amount of money, $500 million per year, with the idea that India realizes that coal is not going to be its long-term energy future. So from where I sit, the path forward on energy innovation is already being set in places around the world. Here in the United States, we seem to be caught up in issues such as arguing about science, arguing about public opinion, issues about communication, rather than getting down to the nitty-gritty of actually taking steps to foster innovation for a wide range of common sense objectives.
Okay, Devon. I'm actually going to go up to the podium because I have a presentation I'm going to do as well. Thank you so much. Roger. Can you hear me? Roger's remarks are actually a great segue into mine because I'm here to talk about the economic competitiveness dimension of this issue. Because accelerating U.S. clean technology innovation has become not just an environmental necessity, but also an economic competitiveness imperative. According to the World Economic Forum, global private investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies is estimated to reach $600 billion annually by 2020. With the global clean energy economy emerging as one of the largest economic opportunities of the 21st century, government policy and public investment will be critical determinants of which countries come out top in the race to attract private sector investment in new clean energy technologies. Unfortunately, as you may have heard, the United States risks losing out on this opportunity as it lags behind other countries in Asia and Europe in global clean energy industries and lacks an effective national strategy to compete. As we concluded in Rising Tigers, Sleeping Giant, a November 2009 report by the Breakthrough Institute and ITIF, the United States trails Asia's clean tech tigers, China, Japan, and South Korea, in the production of virtually all clean energy technologies, including solar PV, wind power, nuclear, electric vehicles and advanced batteries, and high-speed rail. The United States produces only 5% of the world's solar cells, relies on foreign-owned companies to manufacture the majority of our wind turbines, and is losing ground on hybrid and electric vehicle technology and manufacturing. Measured by market capitalization, only 4 of the world's top 30 solar, wind, and advanced battery companies are American. By By contrast, China leads the world in the production of solar cells and wind turbines, and China, Japan, and South Korea collectively control over 90% of the advanced battery market. These Asian nations are also quickly commercializing and deploying clean energy technologies. China has doubled its installed wind energy capacity each year over the last 5 years, including in 2009 when it installed 13 gigawatts of new wind turbines, making it the largest market in the world. Similarly, South Korea has recently become a major solar PV market, increasing its annual installed capacity sixfold in 2009 to make it the fourth largest market in the world. And while the United States has historically been a global leader in energy innovation, other nations are moving quickly to close the gap. The U.S. government now invests only slightly more than Japan does in energy R&D, but as a percentage of GDP, both Japan and South Korea far outinvest the United States. Moreover, the governments of these three nations will collectively outinvest the U.S. government more than 3-to-1 over the next 5 years. We estimated that these nations would invest $509 billion from 2009 to 2013, compared to $172 billion in the United States, and that included investments in the scuttled House climate bill, which will not come to fruition. China alone is expected to announce a new clean energy investment package valued at over $740 billion over the next 10 years. Now, Asia's clean tech tigers are not outcompeting the United States through some inherent comparative advantage, but through targeted and comprehensive public policy characterized by large and sustained public investment across the entire industry, including R&D, manufacturing, infrastructure, and deployment. Already, China's public investment strategy has allowed it to attract the bulk of private investment in clean energy. Last year, China attracted $34.6 billion in clean energy, compared to the United States at $18.6 billion. As clusters of clean energy manufacturing and investment take root overseas, research and innovation activities, America's historic comparative advantage, are starting to follow. Perhaps the highest profile example is Silicon Valley giant Applied Materials, the global leader in manufacturing the equipment used to make solar cells, which recently decided to construct the world's largest, most advanced solar research and development facility in Xi'an, China. Applied Materials is not alone. IBM has announced that it will invest $40 million to create the company's first energy and utilities solutions lab to develop innovative new technologies for smart grid and other applications. The new lab will also be located in China. These decisions follow those of other leading U.S. companies such as GM, Dow Chemical, and Intel, which have all constructed high-tech research labs in China, and show that high-value R&D activities are starting to follow manufacturing abroad, threatening America's historic leadership in innovation. Given these worrying trends, can the U.S. still be a leader in the global clean energy industry? I believe so, but only if the country commits itself to a comprehensive clean energy innovation strategy that prioritizes investment in clean energy R&D, manufacturing, markets, as well as education, infrastructure, and new clean energy clusters. Given that the majority of energy demand, as Roger noted, will be in the developing world, where governments are unwilling or unable to impose either high carbon prices or large ongoing subsidies to make clean energy technologies cost competitive, the goal of this strategy must be to catalyze innovation to make clean energy cheap in real, unsubsidized terms. Without such a strategy, America may lose out on one of the greatest economic opportunities of the 21st century.
Thank you. Rob?
Well, that's a good segue from Devon into what I want to talk about, which is if we postulate that to solve all three of these problems, climate change, energy security, and creating a competitive industry, that innovation has to be at the center of it. The real question then is, how do we think about innovation in Washington? And unfortunately, we would argue we don't think about innovation the right way. We released a report recently called Economic Doctrines in Climate Change, climate change policy. And the default position in Washington when it comes to innovation is grounded in what you could call the neoclassical economics framework. And neoclassical economics, without going into a lot of detail, there's a wonderful quote by Robert Solow, who's an MIT economist, Nobel Prize winner, who, when studying where did economic growth come from in the 50s, came up with the first growth model. Solow had, in the model, he looked at capital and labor, and then there was this other thing in the regression model called the residual, which he called innovation because he couldn't explain it. But he had a famous quote where he said, "Innovation is manna from heaven." And what he meant by that was it just happens. We don't really know how it happens. And more importantly, there's really nothing policy can do to drive innovation. And that, believe it or not, is the common view among many economists in Washington. The sort of component view of that is if there is a role for government in driving energy innovation or any innovation, it's related to setting a price. So if you set a higher price, you magically will occur in the marketplace innovation because companies and other actors in the marketplace will be responding to this price signal and they'll innovate the way out of it. The other sort of view in Washington is if we can't get innovation, if it's not manna from prices, it's manna from regulation. And so the view is, well, we're going to regulate, we're going to force companies or emitters to reduce their emissions. And in that case, if you do that, they'll also be forced to innovate. Now, the problem is that the reality is innovation is not manna from heaven, it's not manna from prices, and it's not manna from regulation. Prices clearly are not enough. And let me be clear, we clearly argue that prices are a component of a solution, as is regulation, but they're not enough. You look at Europe, for example, where they essentially have a $200 a ton price on carbon in the nature of their fuel taxes. So 5 to 10 times higher than any carbon price advocated in the U.S. And yet the number of electric cars in a country like the Netherlands or Germany is 0. Now, what they do with higher prices there is they drive less, they drive smaller cars. So prices make a difference in terms of switching out existing choices. But if you don't have another choice, price signals really don't get you very much. And it's the choice that matters, and that's what innovation, clean energy innovation, has to do. Let me suggest that when we think about innovation in this space, and in particular in clean energy, we're talking about a system that is rife with market failures. So, fine, we can talk about the widget industry, the perfect widget industry with competitive players, perfect information, etc. They will respond to things in the marketplace. But energy is quite different, and innovation is quite different. Number one, we have uncertainty. Markets can respond to risk. You can price risk. You can't price uncertainty. We just simply have no idea whether some of these technology bets are going to work. And if they work, we don't know how broad they're going to be. We don't know what market take-up will be. It's like the founder of DEC computer, IBM, back when he predicted that the most biggest possible market for the mainframe computer might be, 50 computers. And it was because there was a giant level of uncertainty about computing. And we all know, luckily they didn't base their decision to invest in mainframe computing on that. We have information failures. There's just an enormous array of information that's incomplete and uncertain that prevents people from making the decisions. We have spillovers. So in this area, any innovation that an inventor or an entrepreneur or a company comes up with, by definition, the vast majority of the benefit is going to spill over to other companies, other users, other countries. So they're going to be under-incented, if you will, to innovate. We have network externalities, and I encourage you to look at Robbie Diamond's report on the Electrification Roadmap, where if we have electric cars, we have to have a smart grid, we have to have plug-in stations and charging stations, but we don't have charging stations, we don't have a smart grid because there's no real demand for that. So you have all these network externalities in energy. You have what's called network learning. A lot of these places around the world that are developing clean energy innovation are in hubs. They're in concentrated places because there's learning that goes on. One company's learning from another. A laboratory is transferring information and technology to another. You have lock-in. Darren Asemenglu up at MIT has argued if you have a carbon tax It's a very nice paper Darren has done. What you'll end up with is the market will pick low-cost existing technologies, and entrepreneurs will make existing improvements, incremental improvements in existing technologies rather than develop radically new technologies. Resistance and inertia, which we oftentimes forget how powerful that is. I recently testified in Congress, the Finance Committee, on a program called 48C, which is a tax credit program for that's about a 25% tax credit for new manufacturing facilities producing clean energy. And in the hearing, the major opponent of this provision, so just make sure you get this right, the major opponent of a tax cut for American business was the Chamber of Commerce. Now, what was that all about? That I don't know what it's all about, but I would surmise that it's about some of the members of the Chamber of Commerce do not want to see clean energy innovation. And so they will resist policies and practices that would get there. There's a wonderful quote by Joseph Schumpeter, who's a well-known economist, sort of the godfather of innovation economics, and Schumpeter in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy said, quote, "The resistance which comes from interests threatened by an innovation in the productive process is not likely to die out as long as the capitalist order persists." So somehow that there's this sort of open playing field, and incumbents will just roll over when the entrepreneurial new entrant arises. Information overload, valley of death. Talk a lot about valley of death. How do you take an innovation and an invention and move it into commercialization? And finally, path dependency, where firms face choices about what they do, but those choices are constrained by where they've already been. So it's a long, long list, but my point of pointing that out is essentially to say that the entire frame we have in Washington to have a dialogue about this is framed in, is there a market failure? And I really think that's the wrong way to look at it. It essentially puts advocates on the defensive. You have to go to the high court of neoclassical priesthood and argue your case. Yes, there's a market failure, and they'll give you either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. 99% of the time they give you the thumbs down. No market failure. Go back to where you came from. The reality is it's a much better way to think about this really as about innovation systems. This is a complex energy innovation system. It's not just about market failures, and it requires a complex and sophisticated clean energy strategy. And I think that's really what we need to be thinking about, and that really, in our view, is what we need to be spending the next 2 years on, is how do we frame that innovation strategy to intervene in this very complex system that is not likely to change unless we want it and work to make it change. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I will now pick on a couple of the panelists and sort of try to tease out a few of the issues that I heard introduced. And I'll start with Devon, which is that I was intrigued by, I wonder if you could first of all clarify what's innovation. Are we talking about an innovation problem if China is doing all of this manufacturing, or are we just talking about cheaper labor and so on? Why do you frame this as an innovation problem as opposed to a cheap labor issue?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and that's actually one that you hear a lot, that if manufacturing goes abroad to China, why does it matter? We still have all of the innovation capacity. We're still developing the technologies. The first thing that I would say is that we've seen where that's gotten us with clean energy technologies. We invented solar power, we invented wind power, and we've seen those technologies commercialized, and the economic benefits of those technologies largely accrue to countries like China that are manufacturing and selling those technologies to the rest of the world. And then the second part is that manufacturing should actually not be seen as a discrete step in the process from research and development to manufacturing to deployment, but really as part of a larger whole of the innovation ecosystem. And really, as manufacturing goes abroad, we lose our ability to incorporate new innovations into the manufacturing process, where a lot of innovation and cost reduction actually happens. And so we actually lose part of our innovation capacity, because manufacturing facilities form kind of large hubs of innovation throughout the process. So as manufacturing goes abroad, we're actually losing part of our innovation capacity. It's part of a system, as Rob was talking about, with this idea of clean energy clusters forming abroad. When clean energy clusters form abroad, it's not just manufacturing, it's research and development moving to be close to manufacturing, which is also what's happening with the example that I gave with Applied Materials and other companies moving their research and innovation activities to China to follow their manufacturing.
So, but do you fix that by improving innovation in the U.S., or are you really addressing the central issue there?
Sorry, would I fix that?
Or do you fix that problem of manufacturing moving abroad by focusing entirely on innovation in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, part of it is, well, it's not just innovation in terms of research and development. And part of it is encouraging companies and providing incentives to establish new clean energy manufacturing facilities here in the United States. One program that we've been very supportive of is the 48C tax credit program, which would provide companies with a tax credit to produce new clean energy technologies here in the U.S. But it's not just manufacturing. It's not just those manufacturing incentives that's going to make the deal. It's also we need to have a strong domestic market for clean energy technologies here as well, because folks are not going to set up large manufacturing facilities if they don't have a market to sell into. So it's all part of this system that research and development is a part of, but I don't view innovation as a discrete, as simply research and development. It needs to be part of the whole.
And Robbie, if I don't believe I heard you say the word climate in your discussion about electric cars. Is this, I mean, was that deliberate, or do you think this is not a climate issue, or why, or can you explain?
Yeah, I think that, there's a lot of politics in the entire thing, as we were talking about, and, from my perspective, the question is, if we can get the whole country to agree on something and make it happen, clearly want to do that. And, I mean, I'm happy to talk about climate, and I'm happy to just tell you that electric cars are, cleaner than an internal combustion engine, even if you used coal to the oldest coal-fired power plant to power that car, which is not the way electricity really works, and you're going to power these cars. But the NRDC and EPRI did that study. So I'm happy to make a sort of an argument on why we need to do this with climate. But at the same time, my organization and what we focus on is the economic and the national security risk of our oil dependence in particular, and our energy issues and challenges. And, this is a great benefit for climate, but in no way needs to be the driver. And I think that's why you see in the political realm things like the electrification of transportation getting sort of this bipartisan support, where you have this summer a vote in the Senate Energy Committee, which was 19-4. A majority of Republicans supported a bill that cost, over $8 billion. Because they see this as sort of a national security issue. Similarly, after the election, you have President Obama saying, "Oh, here's an area of agreement," then you have Senator McConnell saying, "I think we could agree on this." And from my perspective, the electric car can also represent, as Rob sort of said, was this killer app that drives a lot of innovation up the entire chain in energy. So, one of the issues with smart meters, for example, is or just the smart grid and those types of issues is most Americans aren't going to change their habits to wash their dishes at this time versus that time because, they'll save a few pennies. But putting an electric car in your garage is like putting the amount of energy of your entire home, onto the grid and for your bill. And so at the same time, it's going to matter a great deal when you're charging that car. What's that going to cost you? Your relationship to electricity is going to change. So it's going to go from the electric vehicle in your garage to the smart meter and smart grid, time of day pricing, to the robust transmission, all the way to clean generation. These cars are the only cars that will get cleaner over time, as our grid changes. So unlike the internal combustion engine. So I think there's is it deliberate? I mean, that's not our focus. At the same time, I think it makes an argument to say that it will help with the climate issue, but that's not the reason to do this, and that's not the reason I think you see bipartisan support. And actually, I feel quite strongly and confident that things will happen in the next few years.
Yeah, I also want to pick up on something Rob said earlier, which was the observation that fuel is so much more expensive in Europe, it's not driving innovation. You don't see electric cars throughout Europe. So is that just telling us that when the electric car is destined to be really expensive here, or I mean, it says a lot about what it takes to drive innovation. I guess if it's not, if you've ever tanked up in Europe,
right,
it's shocking how much money you pay for fuel.
So first of all, the cars are just coming out on the market now. I mean, the lithium-ion battery, phones we have in our pocket, it's really revolutionized the idea that this is possible. You can get a distance, that it can have enough energy to get you a certain place at a cost that is reasonable, but still more expensive. So that has to come down in price. So I think one can't say that one is completely corollary to the other. I do think that the United States has to question, will we be the driving market for these vehicles? Because in Europe there is a structural advantage, which is they have high prices, which makes the the electric vehicle actually much more cost competitive, because the whole point is you're putting a little more money up front because you're saving so much money in the fuel costs, and they just have so much higher fuel costs. China has structural advantages, and one, they have a lot of money to put on this. Two, they don't have people have never really owned cars before, and so they're willing to sort of go through that technology innovation. Where here, if you read the articles about it, it's like, well, it doesn't go 400 miles on one charge, so what's the point? Okay, it doesn't really matter that most people don't drive 400 miles. 80% of all trips are under 10 miles, and the average trips are 40 miles for even in rural areas in America. So you don't get that idea. But at the same time, I will say that there are companies, in all fairness, there are companies that have actually moved their electric vehicle operations to the United States, thinking this will be the market that drives it, even despite all those strategic and structural advantages. And that's because we own a lot of cars, and we own 2 cars or 3 cars. And so one car could be an electric car while the technology is moving. We have garages, where in Europe it's not as common. So, I think we don't know the answer to those questions. I always say, this is the only time I quote Secretary Rumsfeld, what we don't even know what we don't know yet. And I think that's very important in this area.
And then, Roger, you gave an impressive list of reasons why we should be thinking about dealing with carbon emissions and so on. I wonder, just sort of putting on your hat as someone who thinks about how the human mind works, does it really help to have 10 reasons to do something? I mean, isn't it better just to have one reason and have people agree on the one reason, as opposed to have to think, well, there's this reason and this reason? And doesn't it make it a harder selling job?
No, I think it's actually exactly the opposite. I like to quote the pragmatist Walter Lippmann, who said that the goal of politics is not to get everyone to think alike, it's to get people who think differently to act alike. And if people come to, particularly in Washington, this should be understood, that people come to supporting action for a wide range of reasons. And it's not so important that everyone agrees. And if you take a look at the debate going on just at this moment on the tax cut or extension of the Bush tax cuts, it's framed in different ways, and different constituencies will characterize it in different ways. And the only way that you get support for major action is to have a broad base of support that can sustain over a long period of time. This is what is well understood in politics. And if we are going to support an innovation agenda larger than anything that's ever been seen in energy for really a period of many decades, then I think having it focused on one reason alone, number one, politically, I don't think it's possible. But it makes it brittle. It makes it subject to change. What if everyone suddenly agrees on climate and we have 4 cold winters in a row? Do you really want to risk your policies? But if there's 7, 8, 9, 10 reasons and different coalitions come for different reasons, I think it's a much more robust policies. And I think this argument about electrification of automobiles provides an excellent example. It doesn't have to be about one thing. It could be different things for different groups.
Yeah, it seems as though our history has been the one thing that we do care about is price, and that seems to be, if the price is high, we care. If the price is low, then innovation stops. I mean, I'm thinking of the energy crisis in the late 70s, early 80s, where we were pouring money into this, and all of a sudden prices dropped, and it was like, okay, problem solved. We're moving on. I mean, how do you move off of that paradigm that basically all that really matters is price, and if people are happy, if the price is cheap, and basically it's hard to convince people to innovate under those circumstances.
Well, I think that we should learn the lesson of that. In fact, price is important, and one of the focus points of innovation policy ought to be on bringing down the long-term cost of energy supply. If you take a look at what's happened with coal, say coal that's shipped out of Australia, it's already, in the last few years, had a market-based price increase equivalent to something like $30 or $40 a ton carbon tax. Around the world, the long-term implications of fossil fuel use are that prices are going to go up. There are wild cards. Shale gas is a notable wild card. But even natural gas represents a significant decarbonization of energy supply. So it's a good news, bad news type situation. But this is something that's, I think, been left out of a lot of the debate over, particularly carbon dioxide climate, is the actual real felt price of energy. A lot of the debate is about predicted prices. So you take the Stern Review. What's the price of energy going to be in 2100? well, who knows? What matters for the political debate is what the price of energy is today, tomorrow, and next year in the next election cycle. So I do think price needs to be front and center, and the success of technological innovation will be to the degree which, as Devon said, that alternatives to fossil fuels can be, in some sense, competitive in an unsubsidized basis.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that issue because, I mean, obviously, fossil fuels are so cheap right now, it's really hard to imagine. I mean, you're just digging stuff out of the ground and burning it. It's hard to imagine developing technologies that will outcompete that. But before we get to that point, which I hope everyone will chime in on, but I want to ask Rob first about why, sort of a bigger why question, which is why are you having this conversation in Washington, D.C., and sort of turning to, obviously, the seat of policy and saying this is a policy issue? Why isn't just the free hand of the market taking care of this for us? I mean, I think that's sort of that was implicit in your comments, that basically there's this assumption that, you know, this is not the job of government, this is the job of free enterprise to find these solutions for us, and we should just sit back and let it happen. And if China and these other places are spending all this money, and maybe it's because they're, well, that's a good question. That's not necessarily an example of free enterprise, is it? But
they're misguided industrial policy mercantilists, and as they go to the bank and win it all, we'll look back, we'll go, geez, they really made a mistake there, didn't they, by taking all the jobs and getting all the market. I want to also come back to your point about, which is why, you know, could we drive these prices down? Somewhere in my keys I have a 5 gigabyte little thumb drive. The price of that, if I were to buy it in 1995, would be $10,000. The price of it in 1962 would have been $2.2 billion. So we have experiences with driving prices down through innovation. Now, obviously, Moore's law is a little different. I get that. But you can envision, as we had a conversation with the head of battery technology at ARPA-E, and you think about, they have a wonderful chart where it charts sort of technology development and capability in batteries and price. And there are technologies that they are working on, that they are funding, that they are supporting, that are very risky, very far out, very speculative. But if they work, we're talking about really, really cheap batteries, and batteries that can go 300 miles and are smaller. And so innovation can get us to where we want to go, or at least has the possibility of getting us to where we want to go. The point about why don't we rely only on the market, you know, the ultimate answer to that is, if you look at what we would call innovation economics, if you look at the new growth literature, it's pretty clear that market forces acting on their own will always produce less innovation that is societally optimal. So there's a wonderful paper by Charles Hall at Stanford, and he estimates that the social benefit from innovation is about twice as high as the private benefit. So if we just rely on private benefit alone to get us there, the incentives and the motivations of private for-profit actors will produce half of the innovation that we need that's optimal for society. I don't want to live in a society with half of the innovation. I want to live in a society with all of it. And the only way to do that is with policy. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about heavy-handed industrial policy. I mean, I think the point there's this continuum in the middle that's this sweet spot. Like, we shouldn't be picking, well, it's lithium air. That's the battery technology that's going to, you know, we know it's going to be lithium air. We have no idea what battery technology it's going to be, but we do know that batteries are going to be important. I'll give you one quick example. I won't say who said this or what think tank it was, but it was I was commenting on a paper a few years ago by a think tank, and I commented, I said, I didn't see anything in there. It was a paper about technology prizes, and I said, I didn't see anything in there about batteries. You know, why don't we have a prize for batteries? It was actually right before McCain came out with the battery prize in his campaign, and they said to me, all of them, all neoclassical economists, the market will produce batteries. If there's an incentive in the marketplace to produce batteries, they'll do it. 2 weeks later, I was giving a speech in Detroit, and I shared this anecdote with a number of engineers from Ford, GM, and Chrysler, and they just laughed. That was their response. They laughed. Are you kidding me? We're not going to be doing that. We need help from the government because those investments are so risky. They're so far down the line. our profits, our short-term focus on the market, it is, we're talking 1 to 3 years in terms of our investments. So there are, I would argue, systemic failures in the marketplace where government can play a supportive role, but not a replacement role.
Yeah, I guess people always get, the hair stands up on the back of their neck and say, ooh, it sounds like you're saying that the government has to pick winners and losers. And what you said obviously is a little bit more nuanced than that. But how do you fund innovation without picking winners or losers? Or do you just say, okay, we're going to pick winners and losers, but we'll wait till we have an idea of what needs to be picked?
Well, we do. I mean, we just by even having this conversation today, we are picking a winner. So we are saying, hey, we think societal resources should flow more to energy than to haircuts and bowling alleys. Okay. As Michael Boskin once said, potato chips, computer chips, what's the difference? Well, big difference is one makes you fat and the other makes you rich. And there's a reason why one wants to focus on computer chips. But the second thing is, okay, within energy, we know some generalized areas that are going to be important. Next generation nuclear, carbon capture, better solar, batteries. Now, the real question is, how do you pick those? Now, if you look at the process RPE used, and we'll hear the head of RPE today, they're not like these bureaucrats back there going, you know what, I really think this one's the... They get a wide, first of all, they funded 1% of their applications. And they have a wide array of applications, and they have expert panels from the private sector, from academia, from scientists who evaluate these things and and they have a portfolio approach of picking a wide range of things. So, yeah, ultimately someone has to pick because we're talking about allocating societal resources, but there's a lot of good evidence that these peer review processes and expert processes that DARPA historically has used, that NSF has used, that NIST has used, these things can work. They don't have to be politicized. They can work. They can be effective. They can drive the right kind of innovation.
All right. And let me get back to that big question about, are you guys tilting at windmills, if you pardon the expression here, in terms of the aspiration of making energy cheap enough to outcompete coal in particular, which is so cheap and so on. I mean, wishing something were really, really hard doesn't necessarily make it so. And I don't know, what do you see, I guess, let me ask that question first and then follow up a little bit. Maybe, Roger, you want to start with that and others can chime in.
I mean, innovation in any sector depends on some expectation that you're going to actually make progress. You could have the same conversation if we were talking about health. You could say, well, are you investing in medical research? You're just wishing that you're going to develop new treatments and drugs and so on. The reality is that with respect to particularly climate change, everyone is betting on innovation. And if you look at the situation around the world, particularly the international negotiations, the idea of massively increasing the cost of energy, we've already heard that a small increase leads to small results. The idea that you're going to have a massive increase in the cost of energy is just not going to happen. It's just a non-starter. So everyone winds up at innovation. And one of the points I want to follow up Rob's comment is that we don't see the results of innovation, particularly the public-private sector interrelationships. I flew here from Colorado on a Boeing jet. Why was I on a Boeing jet, not a de Havilland jet, which was the leading aircraft after World War II? It was British. The reason was because the U.S. military invested in a wide range, a diversity of jet engine technology. Some worked, some didn't. In the U.K., the de Havilland jet was brittle in the sense that it was only one technology. It had some catastrophic failures, and the U.S. took the market lead. In an example that works better in Boulder than here, if you have tread on the bottom of your shoes, the result of the tread pattern you have is the result of public investment in innovation. In the Vietnam War, the Army needed boots that didn't have mud stick to them. And so the characteristic tread that you see on treaded shoes are the result of public sector investments in innovation. Our lives are full of examples of innovation and that delivers results. There's no such thing as a free market, particularly when it comes to innovation. It is a complex ecosystem that for some reason we have left energy out of for many decades.
So, Devon, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of that. I mean, one of the other anecdotes, Rob mentioned the USB thumb drive. I mean, the other one that essentially enabled the information technology revolution is microchips. And microchips were brought down from a cost of about $1,000 per chip to $20 per chip in a matter of decades because of the procurement power of the federal government in the 1960s, particularly for use in manned missiles during the missile project. So, there are and again, understanding the differences between energy and information technology, there are examples of the government purposely stimulating innovation to bring down the costs of technologies that are key to society. And one of the things that this conference, I think, is about is how do we actually do that? We've never actually done that purposefully for energy. I mean, the current mix of subsidies, and we'll be hearing about a lot of this today, the current subsidies for wind energy, solar energy in the United States, they're not optimized to actually drive innovation. They're optimized to drive new megawatts of the current existing technology into the ground. We've never done energy policy in a way that intentionally tries to stimulate and demand innovation from the private sector or the public sector. And so when I think about can we make clean energy technologies cheaper, we don't really know, but we've never tried. And that's what this conference is about.
Yeah, and Robbie, you mentioned how much fuel the military uses. Is the military at all interested in electric vehicles? I mean, could that be a driver of innovation for electric vehicles?
So the military is interested in sort of working on that for non-tactical vehicles. They're looking at other fuels too, right? I mean, the military is the largest single consumer of energy in the world. They're looking at biofuels to fly their airplanes. They're looking at islanding their bases in the United States and things like that. So
what does that mean?
Making sure that their bases, from the grid's perspective, are secure. Same those types of things in their bases overseas. So clearly they're driving it. I do think that the military has an important role and can certainly finance some of the early purchases of technology as well as the innovation. But at the same time, I do think it's they can pay any amount of money. I mean, even in a tight budgetary environment. And yes, do they have to have 2 jet engines options or 1? These types of arguments happen, but they're not under the same constraints as sort of, as I said before, the $1,000 to the vehicle, the penny to the kilowatt hour. That the general public is. So I think they're not going to solve all our problems, but they'll be very helpful. At the same time, when you look at vehicles, we just did a fleet roadmap. Out of the 250 million vehicles in the United States, only 15 million are from fleets. They can certainly provide an early marketplace because they understand total cost of ownership. They're able to do things like right-size their batteries because they know their routes or they know things like that. They pay less for electricity. Things like that, but it's only 15 million vehicles, and out of that, the military is only, I believe, 400,000 of the vehicles, non-tactical vehicles. So, it is large, but it is not the savior for all of our needs. But I'm sure that they're going to be a part of this equation because they clearly are on the forefront of new technology.
Yeah. So, and Rob, where do you see the military fitting in here? Obviously, the examples you use are microchips and things like that, which were clearly driven by the military, which does, as Robbie says, have this sort of checkbook that they can write as many zeros after their numbers as they want, pretty much. And so obviously it's a powerful mechanism if you can rope them in. But where do you, if not the military, or would it be the military this, or if not, where else in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to hear at the panel right before lunch with somebody from DoD to talk a little bit about this. But I think this is essentially this is not going to be driven as much by the military as historically innovations have because it's energy, and we have a Department of Energy, and we would hope and think that the Department of Energy would have something to do with energy innovation. So DoD will play a role, and there are things that DARPA is doing and other parts of DoD that are going to play a role, partly on procurement, but partly on innovation. I think it's important to recognize, though, there's a sort of mythology out there that all DoD ever did was worry about its, essentially deriving technologies that are only going to help DoD. And in reality, DoD had a much broader mandate, and their mission, including in DARPA, was always about a broader mandate than that. Now, you look at one of the most successful innovation programs we have in the country, which no one's ever heard about. Program called the Focus Center program, and it's a program funded by DARPA and the semiconductor industry, so companies like IBM and Intel and AMD. And what it does is it's created a technology roadmap for where we need to be, because the military does understand that if we don't have the most advanced semiconductors, we're not going to be able to have the most advanced weaponry around the world, so we have to keep at the cutting edge because other countries are always following. So they've created this program. They've created these. They fund it 50-50. They fund 6 or 8 focus centers around the country at leading-edge universities where they do research that simply the companies aren't going to do because it's too speculative, it's too risky. So that's a model. We should be having energy focus centers, if you will, for a number of different kind of core technology areas that we think we have to get breakthroughs in. And DOD could do part of it. DOE could do part of it. States are doing some things on their own. So I really think at the end of the day it's going to be a lot of different players all working and hopefully coordinating and collaborating.
Yeah. So Roger, let me ask you, if all of a sudden Congress decided to pump $20 billion a year into energy R&D, let me ask all of you guys, does that solve your problem? Is that really what you're after here? Or how much of your problem does that solve if magically there was a huge R&D budget, federal R&D budget for energy innovation all of a sudden?
Yeah, I would say it's very, very important not to confuse government-funded R&D with innovation. Innovation is a much broader, larger component. R&D is important, and I think if you take a look at DOD, which is perhaps the single largest innovation machine in the world, and you look at its spending on R&D as a proportion of everything that it spends its money on related to innovation, the R part is particularly small, the D part is larger, but it does many things. It puts things into the field, it engages in procurement, it tests things according to the performance, and it has complex and sometimes messy relationships with contractors and so on. But the reality is, I think it would be a failure of the effort that I am advocating if Congress wrote a check for $20 billion for R&D. It'd be great if you're at a university or a government lab, but the reality is that R&D encompasses a wide range of policies from intellectual property, patent rights, and so on, that are, I think the best language I have is an ecosystem. And it's, if you look at medicine or agriculture or other sectors in society where we have made innovation progress, it's not simply the idea you pour money into R&D and iPods pop out the end. It's a lot more complicated.
Devon, did you want to?
Well, I agree with everything that Roger just said. I mean, the one other issue is that it is also about the scale of investment in R&D demonstration and deployment. And if you look at what people call the innovation intensity of different industrial sectors, that's the percentage of revenues that's reinvested in innovation in different sectors of the economy. Some of the most innovative sectors like pharmaceuticals, information technology, 20 to 25% of sales or revenues are reinvested into innovative activities, research and development of new products, etc. The energy industry is 0.3% of industry revenues. At the same time, the public sector invests $30 billion a year in health research. Because we make it a national priority to invest $30 billion a year. I believe the Defense Department budget is about $80 billion for R&D, and it's about $5 billion for energy. So at the same time, we have to understand that scale is not the same as structuring energy technology innovation policy and the different places that we should be investing the money. Increasing the scale of investment in energy innovation has to be a top priority.
Yeah. And Rob, do you want to add a thought about sort of maybe helping define what innovation is if it's not simply R&D?
Well, I mean, I think Roger got it right. Innovation is a broad array of things. It's process innovation, which is going to be very important in this. We have to be able to make these things and make them cheaply. It's not just developing the product. And it's about new business models. How are we going to sell energy? How are we going to provide cars? So it's a wide array of things. What I would argue, one of the things that we don't have is we don't have a national strategy. So we need an articulated strategy. These are not just we fall into them, and frankly, we shouldn't be letting congressional committees sort of do this de facto. We've got to have a strategy that talks about the various phases of innovation and where we're doing and what the role of government is and what the role of the private sector is. Secondly, I would argue this isn't just government funding. There are, for example, there's a provision in the last Energy Act that Senator Bingaman put in that we worked with him on a clean energy collaborative R&D tax credit, which almost no one's ever heard about, but it's a pretty cool tax credit that gives companies a much more generous tax credit if they're doing clean energy R&D in a consortium with a university partnership or a federal lab. I think the goal there is to expand that and make it more robust, but it doesn't have to be about only the government picking things. It can be a wide array of incentives and other kinds of things.
Great. Well, I see our red light is blinking. I hope this whetted everyone's appetite for the rest of the day, sort of the broad overview. Thank you very much to all of you.
Great, thank you.